Hello, I'm the Reverend John Gage. My pronouns are he, him, and it's my privilege to serve as the senior minister with this congregation, the Congregational Church of Needham United Church of Christ, and to share with you today what I did on my sabbatical. I got to start with what a sabbatical is and isn't. According to the Lilly Foundation Clergy Renewal Program, which partially funded my time away and also the activities of this congregation while I was away, a sabbatical is, quote, an opportunity for a pastor to step away from the persistent obligations of daily ministry and engage in a period of renewal and reflection. This is not a vacation, but a time for intentional exploration and reflection, for drinking again from God's life-giving waters, for regaining enthusiasm and creativity for ministry. And that was my purpose in going on sabbatical, that idea of reflection, rest, restoration, and reconnection. Reconnecting to the whys of my ministry, why I do what I do, the ways the Spirit has fed me in the past, revisiting those locations and situations and ideas, and also looking for where the Spirit is leading me into the future. And so it's apt that I began my sabbatical time last February back home in Austin, Texas, where I was born and raised, where my parents still live, where two of my three siblings, my two brothers, also live. And of course, what do I do when I'm in Austin? Mostly I eat breakfast tacos and barbecue. And I swear if Juiceland would like to contact me for a franchise opportunity here in the Metro Boston area, I would jump on it. I also got to spend some time reconnecting with old friends. And when I mean old, I don't just mean that we are now all old, but these folks are some folks that I went from first through 12th grade with and then really have not seen since. So, telling my age, that's since 1988. But thanks, this is one of those places where we can offer thanks to Facebook. We've managed to stay connected, reconnect more recently, and have a wonderful time. Just a 2.5 hour dinner, remembering together and also finding out who we are now. Of course, I also did a lot of knitting. You can look for signs of these objects in later photos. And me being me and Austin being Austin, I also got a new tattoo. This is a tattoo by the same artist who's done most of my work since my last sabbatical in 2008. It's a really wonderful relationship. Glad to reconnect with him as well. The heart of my sabbatical time, of course, was a trip to Scotland, to the Isle of Iona. To get there, you have to go to Glasgow. Here I am on a dreich day, a dreary and bleak day in Glasgow. To get to Iona from Glasgow, you take a train 2.5 hours northwest to the town of Oban on the western shores of Scotland, facing the Hebridean Islands. From there, you take a 45-minute ferry ride to Craignure on the island of Mull. You take an hour-and-a-half bus ride on a single-track road around to the other side of the island of Mull to the town of Finnefort, and then a ferry from Finnefort 20 minutes across the water to Iona. And this is the view you get from that ferry as you're leaving Finnefort and approaching Iona. I kid you not, the water is exactly that Caribbean blue color there. And the climate, just a word about the climate, it's more moderate than you might think, given the fact that all of these places I'm going to talk about today are on a latitude with Alberta, Canada. But thanks to the warming Gulf Stream that hits the western side of the British Isles and Ireland, they actually grow palm trees in these places, and it's much warmer than you might think. Makes me concerned, of course. It raises the concern of climate change. What happens if that current collapses? But coming across the water here, this stunning view of the little tiny Isle of Iona. Just about 100 people live on Iona a year round. There are more sheep on Iona than people. But there has Iona has played an incredibly important role in the life of the church, thanks to St. Columba, or Columcille, as he's known in Gaelic. St. Columba was born in Ireland, and in the year 563 left Ireland in a wee boat with 12 other monks to found a monastery on the Isle of Iona. So there has been a Christian presence, a consistent Christian community and presence on Iona since the year 563. Why Iona? It seems like the back end of nowhere, but that's to us who are oriented toward the land. For people in that day and time who were oriented to the sea, the Irish, the Scots, the English, and Scandinavian cultures, the sea were their highways. It was the highway, and Iona was at a crossroads. And it was from Iona, from the monastery that he founded on Iona, that Columba began to spread Christianity into Scotland and Northern Ireland. Over the centuries, that original monastery was replaced with the abbey, built by Benedictines in the about the year 1200. This abbey's been standing there more or less since the year 1200. That cross you see in the foreground, St. Martin's cross, very typical of the sort of high crosses in Celtic Christianity. This is the earliest high cross on Iona that still remains standing in its original location. This cross that you're looking at has been here, has been standing there on Iona for 1,200 years. The abbey has been repaired in the last century. This is a photo of what the abbey looked like in about 1938 when George MacLeod, a Presbyterian pastor who worked in the slums of Glasgow, began to lead efforts to rebuild the abbey. He invited workmen and artisans suffering in the Depression-era slums of Glasgow to come and find meaningful work on the island, so things could be rebuilt. Inside the Abbey Church, here is the baptismal font that greets you on the way in. The nave, the choir stalls, where the monks would have sat for worship, and where we sat and worshipped. The pilgrims gathered for Holy Week. Excuse me. Gathered for Holy Week. This is where we would worship in the mornings, in the evenings, and the high altar. And yes, those are ferns growing out of the walls. This is still a very medieval space. No heating, no cooling, just the deep chill and damp, almost like a cave, and the light pouring in through the windows. There's the cloisters of the abbey. So our pilgrim group stayed at the Abbey. We had all our meals together. We also all had chores together. Everybody was assigned to a chore group. I got to mop floors every morning for a week and help sustain the community that way. Here's a picture of most all of us gathered together. There are folks in this photo from the United States, from England and Scotland and Ireland, from Germany and Sweden and even Australia, who came to spend Holy Week on the Holy Isle. Part of our observance of Holy Week, of course, on Good Friday involved walking stations of the cross around locations on the island. You see us here gathered in the ruins of the medieval nunnery that is there on Iona as well. This, about the same time the abbey was built, this nunnery was built and was active for about 350 years, offering not a retreat from the world for women, but a place of empowerment for women, even women in business. And we gathered here to remember Jesus meeting the women of Jerusalem on his final walk with the cross. At 3 points during the Stations of the Cross, we remember the stories of Jesus falling on the way to his crucifixion. This was a particularly poignant time for me, listening to these prayers, listening to the sound of the cross falling as the person carrying it let it hit the ground. And a prayer that we shared here was very powerful for me. I'll share it with you now. Reach down on bended knee. Feel this grass, part of the world in which Christ walked and was wounded. God of the ground, whose body was like ours from dust, and who fell like we fall to the ground. May we find you on the ground when we fall. Oh, our fallen brother, may we find you so that we may inhabit our stories ourselves. And this was a key theme that really struck me during my time on Iona, and as I continue to read more and more of Celtic theology, this end of a separation, of an idea of separation between God and the world, God and humanity, and replacing that with an idea that we are made of God, that all of creation is imbued with divine spirit. There is nothing and no place and no one who is separated from God. And so this idea that when Jesus falls, it is God who falls. This is the incarnation taken seriously. It was a blessing for me to be able to take part and to carry the cross for a stage of our observance as well. We continued through the stations until we reached the end, where these women reenacted the burial of Jesus in the tomb. And this is an actual tomb. This is the tomb of the Chapel of St. Oran, named after St. Columba's brother, one of the original monks who came to the island. We placed this cloth representing Jesus's body in the tomb. It wasn't all serious observance of Holy Week. We had time to soak in the beautiful natural environment and the wonderful company together. We took a trip to the Isle of Staffa. Staffa is a small island about 6 miles north of Iona. It's inhabited by nobody but puffins and only in season. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see any puffins, but it is also notable, as you see here, for this really distinctive geological feature, this layer in the layer cake of the island. These are enormous basalt columns that are formed when lava cools at a particularly slow rate and crystallizes. If you can imagine lava crystallizing into these giant six-sided columns. They're about 60, 75 feet tall, and they form the layer here on the Isle of Staffa. The most notable feature, aside from the puffins, of course, is this cave called Fingal's Cave. It's named after an Irish giant, Finn McCool. We'll have more to say about him later. This cave is about 65 feet high and extends about 250 feet into this tiny island. And you can see and hear it here in this video. Oh, let me go back. Oh. There we go. Just really remarkable. If I saw this in a movie, I would think that they had used CGI to create this landscape, but this is a purely naturally occurring and amazing phenomenon. We did also take some time to relax with cream tea at the St. Columba Hotel on the island next to the Abbey as we prepared for Easter. Now, I have never been a fan of sunrise services, but I got to tell you, when sunrise looks like this, I was ready for it. We got up and made our way to the tomb, where again the women shared the good news that Jesus was not there. Jesus has been raised. And we walked away from the tomb to this incredible sunrise over the Abbey. This is going to be my Easter photo from now on. We made our way into the dark and cool of the Abbey Church, carrying the light with us to begin to share with the wider world the story of Jesus' resurrection. You see, we bloomed across with those daffodils, just like we do here in our home congregation as we prepare. And we celebrated 3 worship services that day, and we had communion at one of them. And I wanted to include this picture because I love the mess of this table. Even here in this incredibly historic and important church, things get a bit messy when you're serving God's people, and that's okay. The point is not the mess, the point is the service. And it was wonderful to share that sacrament with all who were gathered there, both the pilgrims and others who were visiting on the island as well. From Iona, I made my way over to Dublin, where I was met by my partner, David. We had a couple of days in Dublin to sightsee. We went to see Trinity College, the historic university there in Dublin. And we went to go see the old library at Trinity College, including the Long Room, one of the most famous libraries in the world. Normally, this library is filled with over 200,000 volumes. But they were off the shelves for cleaning and for restoration in the room, but it was still beautiful. We did go to see the Book of Kells, the incredible medieval illuminated manuscript that actually originated on the Isle of Iona, but was spirited away to the island of Kell to protect it from Viking raiders until it finally made its way to Trinity College here. I've got to say it was disappointing, not just because we had to pay a lot of money to experience the Book of Kells experience instead of just walking through a museum and seeing the book. but it also was only open to 2 pages, and we really didn't get a feel for it. Um, so that was disappointing, but we had lots of other things to do. In Dublin, we went to tour churches, of course. This is Christ Church Cathedral, the Church of Ireland, Anglican Cathedral in the city of Dublin. This church built by Vikings in the early 11th century. There's a reminder that Dublin was a Viking fortress, Viking stronghold for many years. It was the perfect place. It was a town on a hill by a river where they could go out raiding along the coast. But they also had become, many of them, Christians by this time, and built the core of this church that would then be later added onto and renovated. Stark contrast here with this very famous statue you see around the world of the homeless Christ. This statue created by um, Timothy Schmaltz, the sculptor. It makes quite a contrast here. It's a beautiful picture of the nave on the inside. The building is known for this incredible tile work that you see. This isn't just up at the altar. This is throughout the entire church, this absolutely gorgeous tile work, including the most famous and whimsical, these little foxes dressed as pilgrims, which is a motif in some of the tile work and has been taken up in other artwork around the building. Just somebody having a bit of fun and enjoying their work, creating all of this beauty. While in Dublin, David and I wanted to go to a pub to hear some traditional Irish music. Reached out to a friend of mine, Siobhan Garrigan, who, as you can tell by the name, is just a wee bit Irish. And she recommended that we find the Cobblestone, this pub. This was the best possible experience. There is live music in this pub 7 days a week, starting at 5 o'clock until 10 o'clock close. The kind of place where you go to have a pint with friends, but also to listen to music. The kind of place that shushes the crowd when one of the musicians who show up sing. These aren't paid musicians. These are folks that just show up every night as they are able and make beautiful music together. From Dublin, David and I made our way to Northern Ireland, where we used Belfast as a hub for exploring this part of the UK. One of the things we did was to go to the Ulster Museum, which is the civic museum there in Belfast. And it was a study in some contrasts. Hanging over the atrium, you see these giant dragons. These dragons are woven by a mast out of willow twigs by a master basket maker. And you might think, why dragons? Part of that is because there is an enormous amount of Game of Thrones tourism in Northern Ireland. A lot of scenes for the HBO show Game of Thrones were shot in Northern Ireland, and there's a lot of money to be made in that tourist trade. But also, and more meaningfully, in the museum, there is an incredible exhibit talking about exploring the reality, the historical reality of the ongoing influence of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. And when we talk about the Troubles, of course, we're talking about the Catholic and Protestant, English versus Irish, loyalist versus nationalist conflict that raged in Ireland for hundreds of years, but most notably and violently from the 1960s until the Good Friday Accords in 1998. This was a really shocking and moving piece of art by a Northern Irish artist named Jake Pakenham. That's called Peace Talks. It was made in 1992 and was really one of the very first times an artist was struggling with this reality of the Troubles in art. On here in the exhibit, I was really struck in this exhibit that they are trying to have a museum exhibit about an ongoing reality, not just something that happened in the past. And in fact, they were soliciting feedback in real time from people about the exhibit, about what they felt was missing or out of balance. And we're then constantly tweaking this because this really is, this conflict is still an ongoing reality. Yes, most of the violence ended in 1998 with Good Friday Accords, but the conflict is still ongoing. You see it all around you. This is in the gateway to a Protestant neighborhood in Belfast. This mural celebrates a victory, 350 years ago by the Protestant King William III, also known as William of Orange, over the Catholic King James II. All the way back in 1690. This is still a very present reality for folks. You can tell that because when David and I went to see a movie, there was a PSA about supporting integrated schools. Now, in our country and in Boston, school integration means one thing, but here in Northern Ireland, it's talking about schools that are integrated to serve both Protestant and Catholic children together. And it was startling for me to understand that fewer than 8% of the schools in Northern Ireland today are integrated in this way. That is, again, the conflict is ongoing, even as the people endure. From Belfast, we struck out into the countryside for some sightseeing. Here, we're arriving at Giant's Causeway, which is on the Antrim coast, the north coast of Northern Ireland. And Giant's Causeway is famous for another geological phenomenon, the same phenomenon that we saw at the Isle of Staffa. And we'll show you more of that in just a bit. You see the cliffs there. I didn't realize so much of my time in Northern Ireland and would be taken up with cliff walking, but it was so beautiful. We walked out along the cliff tops through this flowering gorse, which oddly enough smells like coconut, and then took a long stairway down to the seashore. And you see here those same basalt columns that we saw at the Isle of Staffa. You see the tops of them here. Again, just so incredibly interesting to look at and good place to take photos. Of course, it's called the Giant's Causeway because this is where that giant Finn McCool is said to have built a bridge, the remnants of which we see here, to go to Scotland, to raid, to find treasure, to have victory over Scottish giants, but got there and found out that the Scottish giants were twice as tall as he was. So he ran all the way home where his wife hid him in baby clothes in a baby cradle so that when the Scottish giants came looking for him, they saw this monstrously huge baby and said, well, my goodness, if the Irish giants are this big as babies, just imagine how much bigger they are than we when they're full grown. And they ran home, and Finn McCool's wife, a cool-headed, wise giant woman, destroyed the causeway. And we have the remnants left here. You see this beautiful view. Just absolutely gorgeous. We made another day trip out to Derry, officially called Londonderry. Derry is the fifth largest city on the island of Ireland. It's in the west of Northern Ireland. It was originally called Derry, or the Gaelic version thereof, renamed Londonderry when the English Protestant crown gave control of the town to the commercial guilds of London to develop, that is, to milk for profit for the English. Derry has long been a flashpoint for Anglo-Irish conflict, especially during the Troubles. Of course, it's also famous for the Derry Girls comedy series on Netflix, which explores the lives of four Derry girls and their English boyfriend through the last years of the Troubles, growing up during that time period. Derry is fascinating for a lot of reasons, but one is that it is surrounded, the core of the old city is surrounded by these walls, only remaining completely intact walled city in Ireland, perhaps because it was built so late in the early 1600s. Again, built to protect the Protestant colonists from the native Catholics using cannons. And not cannons like this one, but actually this cannon. I'm shocked to find that all the cannons on the walls are actually original. They all date from the 1600s. They were here on the walls overlooking, as you see in the background, the Catholic neighborhood of Bogside. The Catholic population of Derry has been relegated to the west side of town for centuries. The green space that you see below here actually at one time would have been the river or a moat separating the Protestant town from the Catholic natives. Bogside is the site of one of the most famous nationalist I'm trying to find the right word. Uh, During the Troubles, this was a nationalist hotbed, a liberation hotbed, such that as from 1969 to 1972, they proclaimed themselves a nationalist free state, called themselves Free Dairy. You can explore it in the Free Dairy Museum here. Of course, this incurred the wrath of the British colonizers who sent police and military to quote unquote enforce the peace and to keep the Catholics in their places. You see that experience memorialized in these really stunning murals in the Bogside neighborhood. Stories of violence and repression and liberation and eventually peace with the Good Friday Accords. But again, the conflict is ongoing. There is one small Protestant neighborhood on the west side of town, visible from the walls, and this is where this sign is located. It says Londonderry. Ooh, let me get that right. Here we go. Londonderry, West Bank loyalists under siege, no surrender. It's in front of this house, in front of a vacant lot just outside the city walls, where loyalist paramilitary groups still hold their annual provocative bonfires during the tense marching season in the summer. We were really blessed by our tour guide around the city walls. We just happened to, through the luck of the draw, meet Glenn Doherty here. When Glenn was a baby, his father, Patrick Doherty, aged 32, was murdered by the British Army on what has come to be known Bloody Sunday, January 30th, 1972, when British soldiers opened fire on a peaceful Catholic march seeking full civil rights for Catholic citizens. And they killed 14 people. An immediate inquiry in London that lasted just 2 months cleared all of the soldiers of culpability and questioned the innocence of the victims. It wasn't until 1998 that a real thorough inquest was opened that took 12 years to get the story right, cleared the names of the victims, called the actions of the British military unjustified and unjustifiable, and caused the British Prime Minister David Cameron to formally apologize. Glenn here was selected to speak that day on the steps of the Guildhall, the building in the back there, which had been for centuries the seat of colonial power in Derry and has become the town hall. He was asked to speak on behalf of the victims' families in response to this rather earth-shattering apology and revelation. In addition to giving tours, Glenn still works for civil rights in Northern Ireland and elsewhere. It's important to say that even though the actions of the military were found unjustified and unjustifiable, only one soldier has ever been charged with this crime and has never been tried. It seems as though the English government, the British government, is simply trying to run out the clock. From Derry, David went home back to Boston, and I moved on to Corrymeela. Corrymeela is a Center for Peace and Mediation on the again on the Antrim coast of Northern Ireland. It's located outside of the town of Ballycastle here. Just so beautiful. Look at the cliffs. It's located about 2 miles to the east of town, out along the beach and up on those cliff tops there. Could hardly mind the walk because I got to meet incredible thing. I got to see and meet incredible things like this. Look at these seals just basking on the rock and not paying us too much mind as they rest out there in the water. And of course, the view from the top of the cliffs where Corrymeela was located was well worth the walk. Again, this absolutely stunning, stunning water and the cliffs, just so, so beautiful. Here I am there at the top of Corrymeela. And these are some of the folks that I was gathered there for this 6-day retreat. The theme for our retreat was resilience. It was really the first full-length retreat they've had since the pandemic. And there were folks, again, from America and England and around the world come together. We were led by the Reverend Kieran Young Wimberly, who's an American Presbyterian pastor. Her husband, Alex, is the leader of the Corrymeela community. And she led us in reflection, bringing in lots of wonderful resources, lots of good folks to come and talk to us, including poet and theologian Padraig Ó Tuama, as we came together and found sustenance in the Spirit. The heart of the Corrymeela community is this chapel, which is called the Cree. It's spelled CROI in Gaelic, and it means heart. And it really is nestled in the earth here. And it has a description of what the Cree is posted inside that I think is just a marvelous description of what church maybe ought to be. It says, the Cree, a heartbeat, a welcome, a resting place, a pause, an open space, a hope, a place of praise, a whisper, a circle of faith, a doubt, a question mark, a comfort, a call to prayer, a refuge, a sign of hope, a song of freedom. Came home from Ireland and had a week or so of rest here with David, and then went on to the next and last significant portion of my trip to Washington, D.C. I call it my perfect adult field trip to Washington, D.C. I think Washington, the tourism department there should have a slogan, something like, "You've changed since your seventh grade field trip, so have we." It was a really wonderful week of going to museums by myself, deciding which museums I wanted to go to by myself, deciding how long I wanted to stay by myself, see a theme. Of course, I went and did the usuals, saw the Washington Monument and the White House and elsewhere, walking and subwaying and busing around the district. But the first museum I visited was the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. I got to get a ticket the last day before they closed for the Passover holiday that week. And this really struck with me. This sign is on the outside of the museum, and it says, the next time you witness hatred, the next time you see injustice, the next time you hear about genocide, think about what you saw here. And indeed, I couldn't help but think about it. And as I moved through the museum, as it catalogs the terror and violence and atrocities committed against Jewish people in the Holocaust, this is a particularly moving space. It's not graphic in any way, except that it's 3 floors above and below, over 1,000 photographs of the residents of the Jewish shtetl of Isiskis in Lithuania, whose entire Jewish population was killed by the Nazis over just 2 days in 1941. Looking at these photos, I couldn't help but think of the photographs of the Palestinians in Gaza that we're seeing in the news now. And those words came back to me, think about what you saw here. I also got to go visit the National Cathedral for the very first time. It's a gorgeous, gorgeous space. Took over 100 years to complete. It is absolutely filled with stained glass and light, as you can see here. Just incredible stained glass windows. This one in particular, the space window, that dot in the middle of the Burgundy planet there, that is a moon rock, actual moon rock brought and donated to the cathedral by an astronaut. It is the only moon rock that resides outside of a government facility, any place in the world. Also includes these 2 brand new windows, just since about 2021. These 2 windows replace 2 windows that were given by the Daughters of the Confederacy in 1957 to commemorate and celebrate the faith of Confederate leaders Stonewall Jackson and Robert E. Lee. I'm sure there were folks who raised concerns and didn't care for those windows from the beginning. But the conversations about it didn't really reach a turning point until 2017, when the old windows were removed and these new windows commissioned by Black artist Kerry James Marshall to commemorate the African American struggle for justice in the United States and the wider struggles for justice they inspire. Thanks to the $35 ticket I paid, I got a behind the scenes tour at the cathedral. I highly, highly recommend doing this. Not only did we get the skinny on all of these windows, we actually got to go up to see the stained glass windows just under the ceiling, about 100 feet up close and personal. And even further, we went upstairs, up these stairs, up to the carillon, one of the largest sets of bells in a church anywhere in the world. You see these giant bells here, 53 of them, that ring out over the district this incredible view. We even got to see a gargoyle up close. And I love this. We also got to see their attic. We got to see that again. It's a famous and historical church, but they've got to have places to keep their stuff as well. They've had old hymnals that they couldn't bear to part with, and you see here in the picture, there's an Advent wreath just waiting for Advent to roll around again. It felt very familiar to me, but it wasn't all just something to smile at. So many people are memorialized there in the cathedral, including meaningfully this Pride season. Um, the ashes of Matthew Shepard, a young gay man beaten and left for dead on a fence post in Wyoming in 1998. His ashes have been interred here, um, along with so many others. From this space, I got to go to the uh, Museum of African American History and Culture at Smithsonian. This is my second visit here. If you've been, then you know that the museum is really divided into two parts. When you arrive, you can take an elevator down into the ground about 4 stories, where you begin a slow spiral upward through the horrible history of chattel slavery in the United States and the struggles for liberation, the history of Jim Crow and segregation, and the struggles to overcome those as well, until you finally reach the ground floor again. I had done that before, and so this time decided to explore the upper floors, which are full of incredible installations of African American culture and art. This beautiful exhibit called Reckoning, Protest, Defiance, and Resilience. You see just some of the really moving paintings and artworks here. I want to draw your attention to this image on the right. This is a quilt, an incredible master quilt created to commemorate Harriet Tubman, the modern day Moses, who was born into slavery in the southern United States, stole herself away to freedom, and then risked life and limb to go back and rescue so many others. Keep this image of this quilt in mind. Another exhibit, Spirit in the Dark, Religion and Black Music, Activism and Popular Culture. I just love this. This is the Bible that was owned by Little Richard and an album of gospel that he recorded with Sister Rosetta Tharpe, these black, queer, and spiritual leaders of African American culture in their time, alongside so many others. And this, you're going to hear a lot more in coming days and weeks about imagination and the theology of imagination. This exhibit inspired that on Afrofuturism, a history of Black futures. Afrofuturism is an evolving concept expressed through a Black cultural lens that reimagines, reinterprets, and reclaims the past and present for a more empowering future for African Americans. It goes along with this quote from a Black author, N.K. Jemisin. I think one of the most radical things that anyone in this world can do is imagine that Black people have a future. A reminder that the gospel is a vision of the future to help change the present on account of the past. I also got to go visit the Library of Congress, which I had no idea was such an incredible, just rococo, 3-layer wedding cake of gorgeous decoration. They also had a meaningful exhibit of important photos in their collections, including these two. Now you see here on the left, this is the photo. This is probably the latest photo, maybe one of the only photos of Harriet Tubman. And this is the photo that inspired the quilt that you saw earlier. The photo here on the right is also meaningful in our United Church of Christ context. This is a photo of Queen Liliuokalani, the last queen of the sovereign kingdom of Hawaii, whom our ancestors in the Congregational Church, which became the United Church of Christ, helped to illegally overthrow in a coup in 1893. Now, stop me if this sounds familiar, where the United States supported business interest in taking over and colonizing a foreign territory. Stories keep happening over and over. I also got to see the National Museum of the American Indian, this really striking building here. I was struck also by, again, like the Ulster Museum in Northern Ireland, they are trying to tell a story that is not just in the past, but is ongoing. And if I had to boil down their messaging in just 2 slides, these would be it. I think to Indigenous Americans, the message is we never gave up. We haven't given up. We've not given up. The light continues to shine in the darkness, and the darkness has not and cannot overcome it, not completely. And the message to those of us outside of the Native American communities that great nations keep their word, or they should. This is one of my favorite spaces in Washington. This is the only museum that I visited twice over the course of the week. This is the building shared by the National Portrait Gallery and the Smithsonian American Art Museum. Now, as a seventh grader, these are probably the two museums I would have enjoyed the least. As an adult, I love them. They can tell almost any story just by how they marshal their collection. You see some of those here. Forces of Nature, voices that shaped environmentalism. Fighters for Freedom, Picturing Justice by early 20th century Black artist William H. Johnson, and Pattern and Paradox, The Quilts of Irish Women. So much to see there. And so many friends to see in Washington as well. This is my friend Adele, who is a Presbyterian pastor that I knew when she was at Yale Divinity School and serving in Connecticut. Got to connect with lots of friends in Washington, D.C. as well. Now, if you were staying up to date on my plans for sabbatical, you know that the next place I was supposed to go was Disney World. But as I got through these incredible and meaningful and kind of exhausting and wonderful trips, I decided that Disney World was not the next best place for me to go. So instead, where did I go? Fenway. I went to go see my very first Red Sox game. Got to see the Red Sox play the San Francisco Giants with my friend and colleague, the Reverend J.T. Hills. J.T. is the pastor of the UCC Church in Westwood, and he is Aaron and Randy's son. And he's a big Giants fan, so he was very happy that the Giants won that day. It was a perfect day to go see a baseball game, and thanks to the Lilly Foundation renewal grant, we had some pretty perfect seats as well. I'm going to end it there. There's so much more that I can tell you. I'm reminded of the words from the closing of the Gospel of John in chapter 21. But there are also many other things that Jesus did. If every one of them were written down, I suppose that the world itself could not contain the books that could be written. So much, and so much that fed my soul on this sabbatical. I want to close with this image of this, the underside of this sculpture of wild geese at the town of Ballycastle, where Corrymeela is located. Wild geese have special significance in Celtic theology, Celtic Christian theology. Unlike in the way we generally think of the Holy Spirit as a dove, soft and cooing, in Celtic Christian theology, the Holy Spirit is imagined to be a wild goose, honking and loud and willful, that comes and goes on its own time schedule, where it is needed and to whom it's needed in the world. So much of the Spirit breathing through this sabbatical time. Again, I can't tell you everything, but I'll share with you in closing this brief poem. It's called Haiku Number One by poet John Cooper Clarke, which, again, poet and theologian and former Corrymeela leader Padre Gotuma shared with us during his session with us on our retreat. It says, "To freeze the moment in 17 syllables is very difficult. To freeze the moment in 17 syllables is very difficult." Friends, I can't tell you everything about my sabbatical, but I can tell you this. It was more than I expected and just exactly what I needed. Thank you to the Lilly Foundation, and thank you to you for the opportunity.